Okay. Ooh. Okay, members. Just gone 6:30, so best make a start. Welcome to this evening's Scrutiny Committee meeting. Welcome to any members online. I see we have Councillor Maynard, Councillor Ganley, and the Chief Executive is online as well. First item on the agenda, minutes. Do I have your authorisation as Chairman to sign the minutes of the meeting of this committee held on the 3rd of June 2024 as a correct record of those proceedings?
So moved.
Apologies and substitutes. I believe there are no apologies and no substitutes.
Yeah, no, none received, Chair.
Cool. And Councillor Maynard is joining us online. Additional agenda items, there are none. Disclosure of interest and dispensations. We've been asking a question with regard to the SIL levy. Should parish councillors declare an interest because they may receive SIL? Personally, I think not, but then I may be wrong. Lorna, do you have an answer to that?
I've only just turned on my sound, Chair, so I'm afraid I didn't hear the question, but I thought it was a problem your end and realised that I had a problem my end. So if you wouldn't mind repeating the question, apologies.
Yeah, we with regard to disclosure of interest, should members of parish councils declare an interest as on the SIL discussion? Personally, I think not.
I think it's probably quite generic in this sense because it's about the policy. So I think that's okay. I think so.
Right. So we won't bother with that one. So going on from that, item 5, community infrastructure levy, SIL governance arrangements. You'll see purpose of the report to present the updated community infrastructure levy SIL governance arrangements and funding decision protocol for approval following a review of the strategic SIL funding process. The offer of recommendation is resolved that the updated community infrastructure levy governance arrangements and funding decision protocol set out in Appendix A be recommended to Cabinet and then on full council for approval and formal adoption. Before I go over to Aaron, I will say, John, Councillor Barnes sent me an email yesterday lunchtime. So I didn't forget it. I thought I would send it on to Aaron, so he's got it ready for Monday morning. But he actually replied to me by about 6 o'clock in the evening on a Sunday. So going above and beyond as far as I'm concerned, because Sunday's a day off. But I will say, quite a number of officers do that. I'm quite often in a parish council meeting and I get a question. So I get my iPad out, ask the question, and then when I get home it connects. And then at 9 o'clock in the evening, I quite often get a reply, which is impressive, but not necessary, because I'm expecting it sort of in the morning. So they've got it when they get to work, not when they're watching telly, having to answer my bastard emails. So I won't have any complaints about robber officers. Aaron, you've got a few questions have been floating around. You've answered them as well as you can. I think there's still some questions floating around. So I think the best thing to do is if I send it over to you, you can come through your sort of meanings for the changes and anything else, and then I'm sure Councillor Barnes will probably ask you a question. No. All right, Aaron.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, I'll come to the questions when we get to it, if that's all right. But just to go through the content of the report. So just to start sort of at the beginning with an overview, really. So strategic SIL, that's the portion of the community infrastructure levy which is allocated to infrastructure provision in Rother by the Strategic SIL Allocations Panel. They held their first meeting in 2022. And as set out in point 3 of the report, the panel have allocated over £5 million to infrastructure provision since their formation. The way in which the current governance arrangements work, they state that contact will be made with infrastructure providers and town and parish councils on an annual basis to identify provision which may benefit from SIL funding. These items are then considered alongside items in Rother's infrastructure delivery plan, which this document is part of the local plan, and it details the infrastructure that's that's required to be delivered during the local plan period. Contact is then made with the application of the applicants, and the funding applications are considered by the panel. So the originally agreed process, which is set out in the current governance arrangements, it was found to be not bringing forward as many applications as expected, I think, by the panel. So in response to this, the panel agreed to hold an expression of interest round so that applicants could put forward items for funding that weren't necessarily included on the infrastructure delivery plan. This did bring forward a number of applications, and the panel did agree to expand the expression of interest process to be a year-round process and for it to apply for both infrastructure providers and also town and parish councils. The expression of interest process has led to the panel allocating funds at a faster rate than anticipated, and there has been concern expressed at the panel meetings that the funds may become too low to provide funding to the major items that are on both the current infrastructure delivery plan, which was published in 2019, and the updated version, which is out for consultation as part of the current local plan. There has also been some feedback from town and parish councils informing us that the requirements for applying for the infrastructure matched fund, which is the specific funding pot for town and parish councils to apply from, is too restrictive, and some of the parish and town councils provided us feedback to say that they found the process quite complicated. So in response to this feedback that we'd received, the panel at their meeting in December 2023 agreed that there should be a review of the governance arrangements. This review was to ensure that the allocation process was effective in allocating funding to the key strategic infrastructure projects in the district. So the review looked at neighbouring authorities' processes, we reviewed our own processes and funding pots, and we also sought feedback from town and parish councils on the process. The review has brought forward 5 recommendations to the funding process, which are set out in Table 1 of the report, which is just below point 28. So these changes are, if I go through them one by one, the first is the removal of the expression of interest process for the Rother Infrastructure Fund. So this fund is for infrastructure providers to use, not town and parish councils, and the items that this fund provide funding to should be included on the infrastructure delivery plan. So we felt that there is no need to have an expression of interest process for that because the items should be included on the infrastructure delivery plan. If there are items that need to come forward that are not included on the infrastructure delivery plan, then we're going to be in as much communication as possible as we can be with the infrastructure providers to continually become aware of new pieces of infrastructure that could be funded through SIL. But the expression of interest process, moving on to the second proposed change, we would like to keep this running year-round for the town and parish councils to use for the infrastructure matched fund. This means that town and parish councils have an opportunity at any point during the year to come forward and try and seek some strategic SIL money to help with their projects locally. The other change is to the funding pot, which is the Rural Rother Infrastructure Fund. So at present, the Rural Rother Infrastructure Fund is subdivided into a fund for Bexhill and a fund for Rural Rother. We're proposing that these 2 sub-funds are combined to create one singular Rother Infrastructure Fund. And that infrastructure fund would be used to fund provision that is strategic in nature. So, for example, items that appear exclusively on the infrastructure delivery plan, which the vast majority of which are strategic items, that have direct benefits to the local area, but also indirect benefits or direct benefits as well to wider district as well. So essentially it's for large-scale items that have a benefit across the district. The other change that we're proposing is the amending the match funding definition of the infrastructure matched fund. So this is the funding pot that's used by town and parish councils. At present, the town or parish council can only bid for up to equal to the amount of local CIL that they have generated. So town and parish councils, if they have a neighbourhood plan, receive 25% of CIL on development, or 15% if they don't have a neighbourhood plan, and those portions are paid to the town and parish councils twice yearly, once in April and once in October. So essentially at the moment they can only put in a bid for equal to the amount that they've generated. This has caused some issues in the sense that affordable housing does not generate any CIL. There's no CIL that's paid on it. Therefore, areas could have affordable housing developments built. It doesn't generate any CIL for them. Therefore, they've had the housing development and will need sufficient infrastructure to support that housing development. But because they haven't generated any local CIL, they have nothing to match fund against. So what we're proposing is that the match funding definition is now changed, that 50% of the funding, as long as it can be provided from any source, so that includes local CIL, but it could also include other grants, then the parish or town council will be eligible to put forward an application. The application will still really clearly need to show how it supports housing development, and if a town or parish council can put forward some local CIL towards it, that will also help their application, and we've catered for that in the application form by ensuring that those questions are scored adequately and weighted in that direction. And the final change is to the Climate Emergency Bonus Fund pot. So this is the funding pot which is for infrastructure provision that also has benefits in terms of addressing the issues of the climate emergency. At present, the funding pot's description is largely focused on carbon reduction, quite rightly, but there are also projects that come forward where perhaps a small portion of the project isn't directly related to carbon but does have some environmental benefits as well. So when we were looking at this, we decided that a good way of addressing this issue to ensure that those projects can receive some additional funding from the climate pot is that we expand the remit of the pot to be able to fund provision which addresses the 5 objectives and accompanying outputs of the climate strategy, with the primary focus still being on carbon reduction and decarbonisation. So the proposed changes have been endorsed by the senior leadership and have also been through the strategic CIL allocations panel. So I'll leave it there, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. How do we want to take this, councillors? Do we want to sort of go through this sort of proposed changes sort of one by one and tick them off? Would that be the best way to
I would have thought we need to take the 5 ward areas separately, because some of them will rouse very little questions, others may rouse more.
Yeah.
Chairman, I'm not sure.
He's gone to sleep. I think he peaked too early. Carl, your interweb has frozen and your voice has gone. I did see you've got a hand up. Might be a case of a switch on and a switch off. Now he's gone. He may return. He may return. All right, I think what we'll do then, the first one then, funding process, removal of the expression of interest process for the Robert Infrastructure Fund, infrastructure providers. Are we happy with that? Any thoughts on that? Seems fine. Vicky?
Chairman, I'm not sure if I should declare an interest as an executive member of East Sussex County Council. I got cut off then, I think, mid-flow, and I don't know whether you got any of that.
Yeah, we'll make a note of that, please. Yeah. Okay, we've covered that off, Carl. Vicky?
Thank you.
Aaron, I wonder if you could explain a little bit more about the difference between an infrastructure provider and the parish and town councils.
Thank you. Yeah, so essentially the infrastructure providers are a list of organisations that we have that we consult on our infrastructure delivery plan. That's how we're defining infrastructure provider. It could be defined lots of different ways, but for the purposes of this, that's how we're defining it. So the town and parish councils obviously have certain responsibilities, but the infrastructure providers have slightly different responsibilities and remits. The items which appear on the infrastructure delivery plan, it wouldn't usually feature any items that would be delivered by a town or parish council. It's much more likely to be delivered by county or by a utility company, for example. It's that type of organisation. So that's how we're defining infrastructure provider.
Thank you. And the second point, I'm just worried that by doing this, some of the smaller projects are going to get lost. So, for example, if a new housing development has been built and an area allocated for the local parish or town council to provide some play equipment or some benches, I mean, that's quite a... That's actually quite a small amount of money in comparison to building a health centre, for example. And I'm just a bit worried that some of these smaller things that won't have an impact hugely, but will have an impact locally and on a number of people. Can you reassure me that the smaller projects will still receive as much notice and importance as the larger ones?
Yeah, I mean, with strategic seal, in the governance arrangements, we have a minimum funding amount of £30,000. So this would only be impacting projects that have a total cost of £30,000 and above. If those other projects would potentially be delivered by town or parish council, would I be right in thinking perhaps? So they would be able to put forward an expression of interest at any point during the year, as and when those projects require funding. But like I say, for it to be eligible for strategic seal, it would have to have a total project cost of £30,000 and above.
So I'll assume that the first part, funding process, Councillor Thomas.
Chair, through you, I'd just like to ask a question about that. I'm not sure I can entirely understand what an infrastructure provider is. So, for example, would a water company wanting to improve the sewerage connection to a housing estate, would that count as an infrastructure provider?
Yes, it could potentially. They would have to put forward a application, obviously, as part of the process, and if the item was included on the infrastructure delivery plan as well. But yes, a utility company, a water company could be considered a infrastructure provider for this purposes.
And do I understand this correctly, Chair, that the proposal is that infrastructure providers would not be to take part in the expression of interest process? Is that right? So a water company wanting to improve the sewerage connection to a housing estate would not be able to bring that forward for a seal grant. Is that right?
Well, if the item was included on our infrastructure delivery plan, which we've got out for consultation as part of the local plan, then they would be able to put forward an application because we're aware of that item. We know that it's almost like a programmed for piece of infrastructure that's going to need to be delivered, or hopefully will be delivered during the local plan period. If there was an urgent item that for whatever reason would benefit from seal funding, the panel do have the ability to hold urgent meetings, and I think that would be something where we would perhaps bring the item to the chair of the panel and say, this doesn't appear on the infrastructure delivery plan, but it does require or could potentially benefit from urgent seal funding. And I think we'd have to look at that sort of on a case-by-case basis. But the sort of primary function of that particular funding pot that you're referring to there, that is for use by infrastructure providers, is to deliver those items which appear on the infrastructure delivery plan.
I see. Thank you very much. I mean, my concern is that I think the public are very worried that sometimes housing developments take place and the sewage infrastructure, etc., isn't there to actually match and deal with it. So what I'm concerned about is to make sure we have a good process whereby those sorts of coordinations can take place. And I think you've actually been able to reassure me on that. So thank you.
Yeah, I think as Aaron said, if it's in the local plan as a scheme, then that takes precedence, doesn't it, on that bit. So we don't need the expression of interest on that because we've asked for it to be done almost. And I think the question that Vicky brought up in our little briefing beforehand, with sort of parish councils, parish and town councils, the expression of interest is useful because they can then sort of know whether to sort of spend the peppercorn money because there's a chance that they can get the big money. And there's no point spending it if there's no chance of getting the big money. So you can sort of, before you start the process too far, you can offer your expression of interest. Yes, you're good to go. Right, we'll start with what we've got. So I think that's good. Councillor Barnes?
Yes, I'm now a trifle confused. I've read through the local plan recently, and I've read through the HELA. Where are these local infrastructure improvements listed? Are we consulting about them? Drainage, Councillor Thomas is talking obviously about some major problems that are affecting sewage in Banks Hill, but actually many of our villages, and I have my own particularly in mind, but it's far from unique, have very antiquated drainage systems which are put under pressure every time we have a new housing development, and very little is done to improve them. And this is a particular problem at Shrub Lane in Burwash, where really the existing arrangements have not the capacity to cope with any more development. Where do we find that in the local plan? I don't remember seeing a section on this.
I think we may be getting slightly off our remit, but can you enlighten Councillor Barnes, Aaron?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully so. It's the infrastructure delivery plan has been published as part of the supporting evidence base of the local plan. So it wouldn't be included within the full document of the local plan, but it's a piece of supporting evidence of the local plan. And we have it out for consultation at the moment, and we're engaging with the infrastructure providers to ensure that the items on that infrastructure delivery plan that's out there in draft process at the moment include up-to-date items, if there's anything additional that they need to add or any items that need to be removed from the previous infrastructure delivery plan, which was last updated and published in 2019.
I have to say, Chairman, and maybe this is something for the local plan team, but I don't think any of the parish councils that I attend are aware that we're consulting on the local infrastructure delivery plan. All that has been mentioned to them is the local plan. The question came up about the HELA, and we were told it was in the evidence document, but we weren't being specifically consulted about sites. Nevertheless, I've advised my parish council it will be wise to comment on those sites. But now we've got a new thing, because here we have again an evidence document, but it's going to become an important policy document. And we haven't been asked specifically to comment on that.
I would say again that we're probably getting off slightly off what we're sort of charged with doing.
I'm really looking to the chief executive rather than...
and I would say the consultation on the infrastructure delivery would be with the infrastructure delivery providers, would it not?
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, it wouldn't necessarily include items on there that would be delivered or funded by a town or parish council. So perhaps that's where the slight confusion is, or the slight difference here is that it doesn't include items, for example, that a town or parish council would hope to deliver. It's items that the infrastructure providers will hope to deliver during the local plan period to support development.
And I'm sorry to persist, but this is quite important because we are community leaders and parish councils and indeed as ward councillors, and we are aware of problems that the infrastructure provider is falling short on already. And we're expecting them to identify those problems. I take my hat off to the presumed honesty of the water companies. But to be honest, when you have fields in the village that are regularly flooded with sewage, you really don't believe the water company is necessarily going to raise that with the local planners.
I would still say I think we're sort of veering off the community infrastructure levy governance arrangements and going into a specific sort of should we fund Southern Water to mend a sewerage pipe? I would say no, but there it is. Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, I mean, I'm only half following the issue, but I sense there's a genuine issue which Councillor Barnes is raising about governance and oversight and, like you say, leadership. And I wonder if this is something we could explore and understand further. I don't know if it's in a member briefing or something like that. Would that be something which we could understand more? Because there are issues. Winchelsea Beach has huge problems with similar sewage infrastructure, flooding, backing up, the pressure being put on the infrastructure there. And if this is something which removes some element of oversight and governance at a local level, then I think we should be concerned about that. It's whether that is what we're talking about here, and what the effects of that are that we need to better understand. At least I do. So I wonder if a member briefing or some kind of exploration of this issue at a deeper, more detail level would benefit us.
Aaron, would you have any sort of overarching sort of answer? When we talk about an infrastructure provider, am I talking about highways and water, electric, upgrading a substation to get enough juice into a site, sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, the items that are on the IDP, the Infrastructure Delivery Plan, are items like that. I mean, it's things like highway improvements, the building of a new school, the building of a doctor's surgery, a hospital. It's those type of sort of large-scale strategic items that would not be. I appreciate Councillor Barnes's point about the town and parish councils having local knowledge that would feed into these discussions, but it wouldn't include items that a town or parish council would be responsible for delivering. It includes items that, for example, the county or highways or Network Rail, those type of large-scale infrastructure providers would be responsible for delivering, and how they relate to housing development during the local plan period, which is the reason why we have the separate process for town and parish councils and the ability for them to do, submit an expression of interest at any point during the year, so that we're in terms of SIL continuously aware of any local issues as and when they crop up and require SIL funding. So I hope that helps somewhat.
Yep. Councillor Creaser.
So if I've got this right, this covers, you've got two streams here, as you say, two things. Big ticket items are for infrastructure providers, and the other bits and pieces for the parish and town councils. Yeah. So just to be clear, this CIL is for the funding of the changes that will need to be around it. It's not shoring up what's already gone wrong. Because there seems to be some conversation at the moment whether, in fact, particularly in places like Winchelsea Beach, they don't have that disgusting stuff in the fields. They have it in their gardens and coming up outside of their house, inside their homes. So that's not what it's for, is it?
Well, SEAL can be used to fund repairs and maintenance of failing infrastructure, or it can be used to fund new infrastructure to support housing development. So it has quite a broad remit. I probably wouldn't want to say sort of, yes, it could fund a specific item, or no, it couldn't at this stage. We'd need to have an application form, and within the application, we ask for quite a lot of evidence about how this piece of infrastructure directly relates to housing development within the district and how it offsets those negative, or not necessarily negative, but those impacts on that on that local area.
So basically, I should have put that down just then. Sorry. Do it in a minute. So basically, what we are looking at is, and it seems to be that in the process, we are basically weeding out the potential for people to want to use the CIL to shore up things that should be paid from elsewhere. And the other thing, of course, is that we are very much at having all sorts of problems, as everybody knows, with our water providers and the state of the sewers and things like that. I mean, obviously, when you're doing a new development within the curtilage of the actual development, all of the infrastructure is part of the development. It's the stuff that from the road onwards that then needs to be paid for. I am very concerned about some of the things that have been going wrong for lack of maintenance and stuff like that. And I am concerned that we then end up watering things down to try and mitigate some of the terrible problems we've got. When in point of fact, we should be getting hold of certain organisations by the scruff of their neck and making them do what they're supposed to be doing, which they are charging us more and more for. So they get money, so they're giving it away. I don't know what they're doing, but they're certainly not providing a service. That's what I was worried about, but I think you've made it quite clear that that's not the case. Thank you very much.
Right. I thought this was going to be the easy one at the top. So basically, removal of the expression of interest on infrastructure providers. Are we happy with that?
Chairman, I did have my hand up.
Yep, go on, Carl.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that, again, I don't blame any councillor for bringing up infrastructure issues where there's a serious problem in their local area in regard to, for example, the water company and how they have or have not invested in the area. And for example, you've got the main water pipe going from Darwell to Baldslow that obviously had that leak quite recently. And the Planning Commission was in there back in 2007 or 2008, and it hasn't been done. But the counter to that is to say that the conversations that we've had, and Councillor Groner and Councillor Meyer would have a strong opinion on this as well, with the water company in terms of the problems, for example, in Fairlight. I think the water company have been very engaging, but they've also been very honest about the depth and breadth of the issues with an antiquated system. And the same is very true when you talk about the state of highway drainage in terms of our fundamental infrastructure. The bit you don't see that's under the ground is creaking. And I think that all councillors have been perfectly correct in worrying that, if something can be done, and go back to the comments that Councillor Thomas made at the beginning, Councillor Barnes made subsequently, when you have a new development, it is surely our responsibility as the authority that gives planning permission to make sure that the infrastructure isn't creaking any more than it already is. So I think the points that have been made have been well made. The general comment that I was going to make about this whole paper was that I do believe it's premature, because we don't know what's happening in terms of the levelling up funding. And I think that, the original SIL plans as were laid out back in 2022 those provisions within that document were made for very good reasons. I've heard about the comments that have been made about parish and town councils, but I have to be brutal when I say, there is one part of the paper in particular that certainly wouldn't favour parish and town councils. And I think the trouble is what's in front of us. I think I won't say it's a knee-jerk reaction, but I don't think it takes account of all of the different needs across the district. And I do fundamentally believe, and this is going to come later, I know, but I don't think there'll be disagreement across the committee tonight when I say that when you raise SIL in a village or a town, that SIL surely should be spent in that village or town. And I will say this, that for a very long time, parish and town councils, in terms of how they perceive Rother, and indeed ratepayers out in the rural areas and how they perceive Rother, there's a huge subsidy that's been paid to the Delaware Pavilion. Now, I happen to think that actually protects the ratepayers from a much greater subsidy were we not to give them that money. But I think that makes a fundamental point, because I do believe very fundamentally that, and I know we're going to speak about it later, but I think it's important to, it's not so much kick this into long grass, but take a more holistic approach, because the fact of the matter is, if you were going to allow large infrastructure projects to swallow up money that might be spent locally, I think that will be the grounds to reject the entire paper, because I think, quite frankly, there is a great danger that key infrastructure projects that would land in Bexhill will be funded by SIL raised in rural areas. And I just don't think that's right, Chairman.
Thank you very much.
I think, Chairman, that takes us nicely into the second recommendation, does it not?
Well, have we gone over the first one? So we're happy with the funding process is removal of the for infrastructure providers is fine, and the process, the expression of interest process to run year round for parish and town councils is fine. Right, funding pot rural Rother infrastructure fund, combine the two sub-funds, rural Bexhill and rural, into one Rother infrastructure fund, which will be allocated to large-scale strategic provision across the district. I think in my briefing I sort of said there might be questions over this one. I'm probably not wrong. Anything you want to explain on this one before we go to Councillors, Aaron? Just to sort of try and head it off.
Yeah, sure. So just to sort of start at the beginning with this one, the Rother Infrastructure Fund was the fund that we were just discussing a moment ago. So this is the fund that is for infrastructure providers, not town and parish councils, to apply for. The projects that this fund provides funds to will have to feature on the infrastructure delivery plan. If they don't feature on the infrastructure delivery plan, then that would be, as the point the councillor made earlier about them coming to us or us having constant communication with the infrastructure providers to ensure that any new items are picked up and have an adequate way of applying. At present, the funding pot is split into two sub-funds. So one is for Bexhill, one is for rural Rother. So the Bexhill funding pot at the moment can only fund infrastructure that's in Bexhill, and the rural funding pot takes every single area in the rural areas and sort of combines them into one rural area. So the logic behind this is that the items on the infrastructure delivery plan that would be funded from this funding pot, they are the vast majority of which strategic in nature. So in the sense that they provide benefits across the district. So although a piece of infrastructure provision may physically be located in Bexhill, for example, it may have an impact on some of the rural areas. So for example, if you were to provide a doctor's surgery in one area, that would relieve pressure on some of the other areas that may have, too many patients on, for example. That's just one example. A school could be another example where the physical location of the school may be in one area, but the benefits that it provides could be across the district by relieving pressure on school places elsewhere. The way in which the funding pot is set up at the moment is it can only fund, that the sub-funds can only fund projects where they're physically located. We do have a caveat in the funding arrangements at present that allows in exceptional circumstances for funds from the Bexhill pot to fund a project in the rural areas, or a project in the rural areas to be funded by money in the Bexhill pot, or vice versa, either way. The only issue with that, as it was originally agreed, is that isn't really the exceptional circumstances. That is the standard process. That is what ordinarily will be happening. We will be funding projects that are sort of across the district. It's for large-scale projects. So, for example, some items that appear on the infrastructure delivery plan are things like highway improvements. That piece of infrastructure might be physically located in a rural area or in Bexhill, but the purpose of it is to ease traffic congestion and improve the highway infrastructure to make the district more accessible entirely, and that goes the same for items that are on the infrastructure delivery plan regarding cycle and walking and wheeling footpaths as well. Although they may be located in one area or they may go across the district, at present you could only fund them from that specific funding pot as to where they're physically going to be located, even though they have a wider benefit. So the exceptional circumstances that we had in the original governance arrangements, we don't think it should be considered really exceptional circumstances. That should actually be the norm. And what this does is it just formalises that process and allows a greater amount of funding to be available. So, at present, with the two sub-funds, the Bexhill, I've just got the numbers here, so the Bexhill Infrastructure Fund, that has had £850,000 worth of SIL allocated from it, whereas the Rural Infrastructure Fund has had just shy of £2,915,000. So at present, the majority of the money that we've allocated has gone to infrastructure in the rural areas as opposed to within Bexhill. But that doesn't necessarily mean that under the new arrangements, the money would end up primarily going to Bexhill or primarily going to the rural areas. It would just create a greater funding pool for both the rural areas and Bexhill to be able to tap into. So that's the logic behind the proposal.
Right. Councillor Barnes, then.
I think what's just been said worries me even more, because I do not understand, with all the development that's going on in Bexhill, West Bexhill particularly, but also North East Bexhill, presumably because there have been substantial delays in delivery, but there's going to be a huge amount of SIL coming in from those developments, which will benefit Bexhill. The notion at the moment the SIL is staying in the rural area and not benefiting Bexhill is clearly correct. Is clearly correct factually, but what worries me under the new arrangement, in reality, is the large projects will drive out the small, and most of your village projects.
Sorry.
Most of your village projects, by their very nature, are going to be towards the bottom end rather than the top end. Flimwell is a possible exception if we were minded to try to trigger highways to do something about the bypass. But for the most part, a village like Burwash or a village like Etcham will have some very useful infrastructure projects which they're very happy to fund. And I do echo what Councillor Maynard said. The basic idea of SIL was to make development of housing more acceptable to the communities in which it was going to be located. Now, I agree there is a formula needs to be found which actually allows you to recognise that some of these projects are going to have externalities. I think a surgery is on the whole a bad example, but clearly a diagnostic centre will have benefits for the whole district. A surgery, almost by its definition, serves a community, and Roberts Bridge has actually benefited enormously from SIL, and quite rightly so, in my opinion. We did, when I was chairman of the PCT, put a centre into South Battle for the same reasons that Roberts Bridge has now got one from SIL, and it's a good idea. So I'm all in favour of finding a formal wording that allows you to draw from both funds to go to a large project that can be demonstrated to benefit the wider area. What worries me is amalgamating them, because first of all, the suspicion will grow out there in our areas that this is Bexhill robbing the rural areas. The great advantage of the two sub-funds is it's transparent. It allows you to monitor what is going on and see visually that the two areas are being treated quite fairly. And it does seem to me that we need to recognise that there are going to be a great many smaller projects which are of enormous benefit to the communities they serve, which ought to stay intact. And that's what the Rural Fund guarantees. So by all means, take away the notion of exceptionality and say where a project can be demonstrated to have these wider externalities, there is a case for supplementing the one fund from the other. That will be a sensible rewording. But to actually abolish the two funds removes transparency and will create the suspicion, a very reasonable suspicion, if it's all going to go to large projects, that Peter is always going to be robbed to pay Paul.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wonder how effective all this is going to be. You have to look at the practicalities of things. North East Bexhill, when you go into Stillhaven Westwood Road, they've already built 200 houses. And Jeff Pryor, who recently left the council, said no one will give me a set date when they expect to build a new school or a new doctor's surgery, because it will create a complete ward. They're intending to build 1,000 houses. And there is an issue here, I think, for planning, because since the 2 years they've been building that estate, every other month they're digging up Westwood Road and they're putting a new sewer in, or they're putting electrical connections in, or water supply, or street lighting. It's endless. It just never stops in Westwood Road, digging the road up. So they knew those houses were going to be built. Where was the conversation? How was this all pulled together, about the utilities and also the forward planning of the schools? And so there's something not right in the system, It doesn't seem to work, not how it should.
Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Chair. I certainly endorse what Councillor Barn is saying. It facilitate exchange between one pot and another. And the reason I say that is because I think we come back to what do residents do, what do residents use, and rightly or wrongly, the public transport connections between Bexhill and all the rural villages right up to Flimwell is very poor, and people tend to stay and use the facilities within the rural communities, and the Bexhill people tend to use more their own facilities. So that I think, clearly if you can identify a joint benefit, absolutely support that. But the majority of day-to-day stuff, the cycle routes, the doctor's surgery, the new primary school, is local benefits rather than an overall district benefit, I would say. But make it flexible, of course.
Councillor McGurk.
So there's an existing perception of a bias towards Bexhill, and if we remove the current the two approaches to the infrastructure fund, I think that just cements that perception. I think I agree with Councillor Barnes. There's a need to differentiate and to ensure that we have a perception of fairness rather than combining the two funds. I think if we have certainly in Rother, in Rye, Rye and Winchelsea, we wouldn't see much benefit out of certainly a GP surgery in Bexhill. Absolutely, we get benefit from things like the De La Warr, and if there was to be development of transport, at a regional level, then absolutely that would benefit across our district. But I think it's about perception as much as anything, and it's really important we preserve a perception of fairness. And if it ain't broke at the moment, then there doesn't seem, I can't see a reason to fix something that isn't broke. If we do have the ability under exceptional circumstances to via money across or use both funds, then what's the point of going through a process to revise something that doesn't need revision?
Councillor Cook?
Yeah, very similar comments to Councillor McKirk. I mean, this project, if it was 2022, I rather thought it was a little bit earlier than that, but if it was it's only been running for 2 years. Why are we changing it yet? I mean, in 2022, building was very slow to begin. Suddenly, it's really beginning to take off. And, maybe we could just wait. I would like to suggest that particularly with this one in particular, actually, we hold off and we wait for another couple of years to see how the whole process is working. As a parish and town councillor, I do get an awful lot of comments. Oh, it's always Bexhill, which is unfair because it isn't always Bexhill. We all do get benefit, but that is what our residents think. So I think with this one in particular, I'm really sorry, Alan, because I did sit in on the SIL meeting when we did discuss this, and you fought a very good case. And I've talked about it with my parish council, I've talked about it and thought about it, and I really feel that we should stick with the decisions made back in 2022 to keep the two pots separate. I'm sorry.
Well, what we've got to do, this is, as I said at the beginning, this is going to Cabinet next week? Yep. And then Council for the end of the month. So we can come up with whatever we like and advise Cabinet of our thoughts and see what they have to say. Do we just want to keep it as the two funds for now, or a different form of words to if Aaron's ran into some difficulty with a different form of words, work it out? I don't know.
I would be very happy to move a recommendation to Cabinet that the two funds are preserved, but if the word exceptional is thought too restrictive, I would say that where a project can demonstrate that it has benefits for both the rural and the urban area, it should be able to draw on both funds, principally from where it's located, but supplemented from the other fund. And I think a form of words like that is probably better than calling it exceptional. It will actually be normal. I think the big thing we must avoid is too much prejudice in favour of large schemes. I think one of the reasons we keep the rural fund is because on the whole, the smaller schemes are going to be in the rural areas.
Okay, thoughts on that, Aaron? Anything? Or are you ready to go home?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Of course, I think that I think that having the funds, if we were to go down the route of leaving the funds separate as it is, that doesn't cause too many issues in terms of the other sort of background documents that we've got to this, for example, the application forms and the kind of, the communications that we've got to go out once the new process is agreed. So yeah, I mean, if they were to stay as they are, that is, that's okay from that perspective. I did just want to make a couple of points. I just wanted to flag up one point, which was that some of the large housing developments in Bexhill will not actually be SIL liable because the planning permission was granted prior to the adoption of SIL in 2016 here. So those Bexhill funds, they won't increase as quickly as it might sort of appear when you outwardly look over and see the amount of houses that are being built. So I think, there wasn't any sort of other driving force behind this than to allow a greater amount of SIL to be accessed by both rural areas and Bexhill. But just to be clear, at the moment, the rural fund has got slightly more money in it than the Bexhill fund, and I think that looking at the SIL payments that are due to come in, the rural fund will be increasing quicker at the moment than the Bexhill fund. So once again, the logic behind it was just to allow there to be a greater amount of funding available for those items that appear on the infrastructure delivery plan. But I think if we do have that ability to be able to use some money from one of the funds to fund something that's located in a different area, we just need to be really careful in thinking about how we make those decisions and how the panel make those decisions. So we might need to sort of draft up some supporting, some sort of checklist or something for the panel to consider when they're making that decision. Is this something that does require us to dip into the other funding pots? I'll leave it there.
Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I like Councillor Barnes's suggestion that the word exceptional is replaced by maybe a justification as to why you're taking things from one pot or both pots. The other thing is, much of our discussion is focused on things that are really sorted out at planning stage. We have statutory responders, and if the water companies say it's fine, we can do it, it's not really up to us to say, we don't think we can, and you can, and by the way, would you like some money to help you out? That's not where we're going at all. So, given that a lot of what we've spoken about is the way in which planning interfaces with development, and we also know that planning is about to be all thrown up in the air and land in a completely different configuration, I'm not too sure that we're going to get much benefit out of rejigging this procedure at this time, because who knows how infrastructure is going to be. I mean, if the government is saying the answer's got to be yes, it would seem reasonable they say, oh, and by the way, we'll help out with the increased infrastructure, or they may put sanctions or requirements on the utility companies to say, because we've said yes, you do have to upgrade your infrastructure, you do have to build another substation, which all of this might be completely outside the SIL discussion. So I think maybe modifying the exception wording, but leaving the procedure in place which I think seeks to do the right thing. But I don't think we should agonise too much over how that integrates with planning and the statutory responders and how they respond, because that's kind of going to change. So I would be with Councillor Barnes if he's for accepting this document with those modifications to the bit that mentions exception. Thank you.
Yep. Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry. Chair. I'm concerned about the thinking that lies behind this proposed change. Okay? Namely that obviously the council will have objectives in terms of the levelling up funds. It will have projects it's got in mind. And I think in many cases, the council will not have enough money to be able to fund those particular projects from its own resources. So an example might be, for example, a new leisure centre. We might get £9 million from the government, but that will still leave a shortfall for the council to find the difference. And I'm wondering to what extent one of the motives behind proposing this amalgamation of the two funds was that maybe the council was thinking along the lines of, if we can't actually fund the projects we want to fund from the government money, are we thinking of using some of the SIL money to fill the gap? And I'm not sure whether that's even what can be done, but I'm wondering whether, in a way, we're being prepared for the idea that these maybe slightly grandiose or major projects will only become viable if some SIL money is put into them. And that might be why there's a thought about taking money, which there is in the rural side of things, and putting it into one pot that can become more easily available to fund those projects. So I'm just curious about what lies behind this suggested move. It's just a question. I don't know the answer. Thank you.
Aaron, I'll leave you with that one.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key things that was a factor in putting this into the governance review was when the application for funding from the NHS came in for the doctor's surgery in Robertsbridge, the specific funding pot of that, the Rural Infrastructure Fund, was actually around £200,000 short of the money that the NHS were requesting. So the panel had to make quite a difficult decision there. Do we agree to allocate sort of more than what we've actually collected, or do we, not, and the project doesn't receive funding, and therefore there's a potential that it may not move forward? And we discussed it at the time as a panel. If we were able to tap into some of the money in the Bexhill Fund and just have this as one overall Rother infrastructure fund, because this is a piece of infrastructure that, yes, it is localised, but will have benefits across Rother in essence, because it's delivering a key piece of infrastructure, then that would be really good, and we'd have easily that money available and some left over. But the panel decided that obviously we didn't do that at the time, and instead what they did was we agreed to fund that money on the basis that when the project actually comes to be delivered, we will have secured more of that money through SIL development at that point. And we've actually got ourselves up to that point already, and that decision was made in March. So we've been able to generate that SIL to fill that gap quickly. So that was one of the sort of factors behind it. Was we've got a really good project here. We've actually, we've got a great application in front of us. This is a key piece of infrastructure, but we're slightly short on the money here. How do we ensure that we can deliver this? And we discussed it as a panel, and then that went into the governance review of, well, we could combine the funds and just have this as one overall strategic SIL fund that would then just open up more money for provision in both Bexhill and the rural areas to be able to use. And just to make a point on the funds within the rural areas, at the moment, the process is already taking SIL that's being generated in one area and spending it on a different area. It just doesn't include Bexhill. That's the only difference on it, because Robertsbridge hasn't actually generated any SIL yet. It has housing development planned that will generate SIL, and that was part of the panel's decision making on the doctor's surgery. So that 1.2 million that's been allocated to that project, for example, is not SIL that's been generated in Robertsbridge. So we're already, under the current arrangements, we're already taking some SIL money generated from some area and using it in a different area, because that's where the piece of infrastructure lies at the moment. This proposal would just bring Bexhill into that as well, which would increase the amount of money available for the rural areas and for Bexhill. Thanks.
If you must.
I can throw that up, because I think there isn't a point to be thrown up here. Because I wasn't so much asking about when the money goes from Bexhill to a rural area. I was asking about the Levelling Up Fund and what that might imply. My guess is that large infrastructure projects are much more likely to be in Bexhill than in the rural areas, for the very simple reason it's a more populous area, it's got a greater concentration of population, and consequently my suspicion is that a lot of those Levelling Up projects, the major ones, things like the Maritime Centre, etc., will actually be Bexhill projects. And therefore, if we have one fund, then most of the money, the actual direction of the fund, is going to be from the rural areas to the town. That's just a simple point that I'm making. I'm not saying that that's good or bad, but I think that could be a motive why we're being asked to create the single fund. I'm just making that point. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Barnes.
The advantage of leaving the two funds intact, well, modifying the wording around projects that really have big externalities, and the leisure centre might well be one. I can see that would serve a much wider area than just Bexhill, is that it's transparent. You will be able to see where the money goes, whether there is a bias which needs to be corrected, whether small projects are being awarded as well as large ones. So I was much about a demonstration effect of fairness and transparency and ease of monitoring as all the other reasons why I think actually keeping a rural fund is quite important for the reasons that Councillor Thomas outlined.
Lorna, Chief Executive.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to assure Councillor Thomas I haven't been party to any discussion like that. You know, when it comes to the levelling up projects, you know, we'll have to do a business case. You know, the gap in funding might be funded through capital receipt or through another funder. But this certainly isn't a driver of this change to this policy. That's not a discussion that I've heard. So I just wanted to reassure that that's the position. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I think basically from the Becky.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say I think we've talked this through round and round and round now. We have had a proposal. I think perhaps it's time we voted on it or agreed it or whatever process you want to move forward.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Took the words right out of my mouth. So basically, Tom, I think you've, Aaron, you've got the gist of the conversation there. Did we have a form? What do we want to put for a form of words? So we just keep them separate and slightly change the exception to.
I move that the two separate sub-funds are kept intact, but the reference to exceptional circumstances is reworded to say that where a project can be demonstrated to have benefits for a much wider area than the parent area, that both funds can be drawn upon. One being the principal grant. If you want more detail, one being the principal grant, but the other a supplementary grant.
We can't have it shorter than that, can we? Louise will make it decipherable. Right. And Councillor Green sat behind you has taken it noted as well, ready for cabinet. Right, okay, so a slight change on that one. Right, funding pot infrastructure match fund, to amend the match funding definition to state that if 50% of the funding can be provided from any source, then the remaining 50% will be allocated. Happy with that?
Yeah. Chairman, you are assuming that everybody is supported by motion. We probably ought formally to take a...
Seconder is Councillor Cook. Are we happy with Councillor Barnes' motion? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much. For the benefit of the tape, as they say, don't they? Right, so funding pot infrastructure match fund, we're happy with the change there.
Chairman, a couple of questions, really. I'm happy with the change. First is around affordable housing, which doesn't pay SIL. Does Homes England, when they make their grant for affordable housing, make no payment at all towards infrastructure? That's my first question. The other is this slightly curious thing we wrote in, and I can understand why, but we've already breached it at Robertsbridge, that no project should be supported to more than the extent of the locally generated SIL. That seems to me a problem in most rural villages. We really, I think, should query whether that ceiling is really appropriate. Can we not trust our panel to be reasonably fair because otherwise we're going to handicap some of our smaller villages. Breitling, for example, may have a project, but they, by definition, they're going to have no development whatsoever, and therefore no sill.
Any answers to that one, Aaron?
I'm afraid I don't have an answer to the first question, but perhaps we'll be able to take that away and get a response to it. I'm not sure on that one. With regard to the second question, I think that the situation you described there is kind of what we're trying to resolve with this proposal, is that if a local area hasn't generated any sill, for example, because they've had affordable housing, or perhaps because they haven't had housing development, but housing development in a neighbouring parish or town is having an impact on the infrastructure in that other area, under the current proposal, under the current arrangements, they wouldn't be eligible really to put forward an application. It'd be really unlikely for them to secure funding. But under this, as long as they can provide 50% of the funding from another source, so that could be a grant or whatever source, then the remaining 50% could be allocated from the SIL pot, providing that the panel approve that allocation. So it really seeks to address the issue that Councillor Barnes set out there.
Okay. Happy with that?
I think so, but has the wording about the ceiling disappeared as well as the alteration to the match funding? Because that did seem to me a somewhat arbitrary, favouring much larger villages at the expense of smaller villages. And in a way, it seemed to me unnecessary if you've got matchmaking funding in place. And I favour the widening of the wording around that.
I'll leave that with you, Aaron, to sort of work out some wording for Cabinet.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it has removed the sort of criteria that you can only bid for up to the amount equal that you've generated. We've taken that out completely. Yeah.
Right. We're happy with that then, are we? Yeah. Good. Funding pot, climate emergency bonus fund. Expand the funding remit to include potential to fund provision which address 5 objectives encompassing outputs of the climate strategy, and the primary focus being carbon reduction and decarbonisation. Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested in this one. I think it's really positive, and I think this, really, really welcome the expansion of these changes bring about in the how the fund can be used. Do you think, because we're anticipating more funding coming to support things like community energy infrastructure, and do you think that this sort of funding pot could be used as match funding to really maximise some of that, we're kind of hoped for, anticipated funding to support climate-focused development at a community level? Do you think that would be used for match funding in the same way that other parts of the pot?
Sorry, could you describe what you mean? What type of project you mean to be funded? Again,
we're looking at greater focus from the new government on community level energy infrastructure, things like developing solar at a local level, developing car charging, whatever, those sort of community infrastructure, community energy projects that have sort of tailed off a bit of late. That sort of thing, community-led development of energy infrastructure.
I think that those are the type of projects that this funding pot is sort of designed for. It would still need to obviously have a relationship to housing development in the area that it's being proposed, or wider impact across Rother. But yeah, that is the type of provision that this funding pot is designed for.
So I take it we're happy with this one, are we? Councillor Burton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly, and I know the wording is to expand the funding remit, which I totally support, but the fundamental of this fund, the criteria for this fund, I think there is an issue in that if designers are doing a really good job at planning their solar, their water collection, their grey water, all the infrastructure to make a building carbon neutral, they wouldn't qualify because it's only for items that are in addition and they add in later. And I know that is not for discussion here, but I feel that the well-planned project with climate and carbon at the fore is not supported in the way that I would like it to be supported by the wording of this fund. I'd just like to register that point.
Well, I could say when I built my house and I added triple glazing windows and extra insulation and everything else and made it A-rated for thermal efficiency, I paid for it and no one else did. But I did that for my benefit, so my heating bills are less.
I must answer, we're doing it, we're here to facilitate progress.
Anyway, we're basically happy with what we got written here, aren't we? Except for what Councillor Burton said. Aaron?
Yep, that's fine. I just wanted to sort of make the point, addressing Councillor Burton's point there, that the primary function of this fund is to top up a funding proposal that's already coming forward. So if there's a piece of infrastructure that's coming forward, it gives the infrastructure provider or the town and parish council the ability to secure some further funding to sort of go above and beyond what they would already be planning on doing. So, for example, if you were building a community hub, you would have the chance to bid for some more money if you were going to include something like electric car charging points or solar panels or any of those type of infrastructure. Any of those type of additions to the infrastructure. So that's kind of the purpose of it. Primarily is for topping up projects, but it also can be used to fully fund projects, which we've done one project so far, which is the Village Hall's energy project, which has been fully funded from this funding pot. I hope that helps someone.
Councillor McGurk, if you're quick.
Yes, just a little point. Would another example of the sort of additionality be something along the lines of a solar-powered EV charging point for a local car club, that could be supported in the development?
We'd have to think about that one. I think a local car club, I think it would be difficult to define that. Obviously, it's not a town or parish council, and obviously it'd be difficult to define it as an infrastructure provider. So I think we'd have to be sort of clear on who would be making the application there and how that relates to the impacts of housing development, as opposed to putting car charging or solar panels or those type of things on a community project that's sort of required in just direct response to the impacts of housing development. So yeah, that would be a case to look at, I think.
I hope it's pertinent, Councillor.
I think the notion this won't be a town or parish council may turn out to be wrong, or it may be a parish council working through a charitable trust. But I know at least one village that is looking at a village energy project, because the new housing there was fueled by propane gas, which of course is a very short-term remedy, and it clearly is, the parish council is taking it on itself to actually look at how you put that right.
Right, so we're happy with the fourth one. Yep. Good. Right. I think we've done. It didn't take long. Thanks, Aaron. Moving on, agenda item 6. To endorse the Council's productivity plan prior to the submission to the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities, resolved that the productivity plan requested by the Department of Levelling Up Housing and Communities be considered and recommended to Cabinet for any amendments as necessary. The only thing here is Anna's had to work up and answer some questions from a chap who's not even in the job anymore. put it bluntly. So Simon Hall MP, Minister of Local Government, wrote this letter in April asking for answers. He obviously wasn't told by the Prime Minister that he was going to go to a general election. So in the meantime, he is no longer the Minister for Local Government, but he did actually keep his job as an MP. So he's now in opposition. So whether this gets read by anybody, nobody knows. Anna sincerely hopes so, that somebody somewhere reads it. If no one else has, we have. So this is a bit of a funny one. Anna, over to you.
I think you've said more or less everything. I don't think I could say it any better, but thank you. I hope you've read it. It has proved to be quite a useful exercise in that we haven't been able to cover everything because they only want 3 or 4 pages. So I've just had to illustrate really all of the work that we're doing to improve productivity and efficiency and the barriers for change and things that local authorities are struggling with. So in only sort of 3 or 4 pages, I've taken the liberty of 5 already, and that was tricky. But a lot of the improvement activity that we do is linked to our Fit for the Future programme, and you'll see that I've repeated that quite a lot during the plan. So it isn't comprehensive. With the limited space that we've got, you just can't cover everything. But it is an illustration of what we're doing. And it has been useful, and I think it will be useful for members of the public to see what we do. And I think we'll be able to build on it as time goes by.
Good. So basically, a useful thing to have been forced to do. So we take that as a positive. Councillor Barnes.
Chairman, I think this is a very useful resume for us. I think it also enables us to learn lessons from other authorities when we study their documents, and hopefully they may learn lessons from what we're doing so well. Where I want to just focus my comments, and I'm grateful in a sense to Councillor Burton earlier, because I think she also is on the same tack, is pages 36 and 37, where we're looking at barriers. On transport, I think I'm slightly worried we're making an assumption that we're going to get rid of the car. My guess is that when we have electric cars and hopefully hydrogen cars, which I think are only just around the corner, that actually much of what's said in the paragraph on transport probably won't apply to the rural areas. I can't see us managing to get a full rural transport system up and running, and people just don't use it. Even with the older people's permits, it's surprising how few people use the bus service. You'd have to make it a lot more frequent and run at weekends and evenings for people to do with their car. So I'm a bit worried about what we're saying under transport, because it seems to me very time-bound. I have the reverse feeling on page 37. We assume, I think, a little too easily the current building regs. And it seems to me one of the things we should be saying to the government in no uncertain terms is your building regs need updating to take full account of the need to improve your housing standards, both in terms of their use of water. I've pointed out before in this chamber that the UAE recycles 70% of its water. Grey water arrangements in housing, quite an important part of that. And again, it seems to me on energy provision in the house, the way you actually insulate the house, all of these should be in an updated set of building standards. And it's something we should be hammering away rather than simply assuming the current building standards are adequate. They're not.
Building regs were updated last June.
Yeah, but they're still not
Well, they probably are. I haven't built a new house for a couple of years, so I wouldn't know. Councillor Byrne.
Thanks, Chair. Just rolling back really to about 5 minutes ago, I really support the idea of getting this document into the public domain. At least what we have done and how we are tackling the issues in front of us. I agree with Councillor Barnes that maybe it doesn't lay out all the issues that we need to be tackling and therefore doesn't contain our proposed actions in those areas. But I think just as a document saying what we have done against these questions is very valuable. And let's see what the public come back with. The public may come back with things that we haven't noticed, saying, why aren't you doing this and why aren't we doing that? So getting it into the public domain, I think, will be a really good thing. I must congratulate Anna on the way she summarised really what does the council do. And instead of writing War and Peace, she's come up with a really good, punchy document that we can look at quickly and comment on, which is evidence this evening. Thank you.
Yep, would agree with that. I'll take you're happy to move the recommendation. And the seconder? Oh, got loads of them. Oh, Councillor McGurk would go for that one. All those in favour? Cool.
Can we suggest that Anne does look at the paragraphs on page 6? Because I think they could be modified sensibly in the direction of more emphasis on standards. I think it would be helpful.
Yep. Got that, Anna? Yep. Okay. All in favour? Christy, Avi, thank you very much. Thanks, Anna. Item 7, what we got here? Office purpose of report. Note draft financial outturn for 23-24 based on expenditure and income up to March 31st, 2024. Resolved that the provisional outturn position for the general fund reserve account for 2023-24 be approved. Financing of the 23-24 capital programme along with the updated capital programme for 24-25 and 2-25-29. Scheme financing is outlined within the report. Details of Appendix B be approved. Final reserve transfers, Appendix C, be approved. Has this been a cabinet yet? Or no?
Next week.
That's next week, isn't it? Andrew, over to you.
I'll keep this short because I've got quite a sore throat and I'll probably start coughing already. But it's showing a small improvement over Q3, about 400,000. But I think the key message is that you had a deficit budget in this year from the off. It was still obviously a deficit by year end, and there is a £2 million reduction in the reserves as a result, even though it's a slight improvement. And obviously you've got a deficit budget in this current year as well, and you can't keep on going having deficit budgets year after year after year, so there's no reserves left and be in Section 114 territory. So I thought I'd best probably flag that up at the start, really. The key variances during the year are in terms of the failure to deliver the savings and the financial stability programme, which led to sort of over £1 million of deficit compared to the original budget, but that was offset by net financing costs being a very similar amount the other way, mainly due to the sort of increased interest rates, the sustained high interest rates during the year, and delays in capital expenditure, receipts of grants and stuff off the government. So that actually offset it. But I would just restate that it is a deficit budget, it's a deficit outturn, and we should be concerned about that and keep our eye on the ball. The next report is about savings in the current year try and deal with that, and that will be the theme for many budgets and many monitoring reports to come. Really, that we need to turn that round and get out of that deficit situation as soon as possible. The report just highlights various variances throughout. I don't intend to go into mass detail on those. Those are the two biggest variances.
Any thoughts, Councillor McGurk?
Yeah, Andrew, when you say a deficit budget, because we worked hard to deliver a balanced budget, yeah, so it sounds like we didn't deliver a balanced budget, but
it's still using reserves.
Yeah, but we delivered what was a balanced budget, but it's gone into deficit then. Savings haven't been realised.
It's balanced, but only by using reserves.
Right.
And it's not, obviously, there's a limit to how long we can do that.
Yeah, we know reserves.
Right.
You'll see from Appendix C that reserves have dropped from 12 to 10.
Yeah.
You'll see, Cabinet will see next week that they're predicted to go down to 7 in year.
Yeah.
And core general reserve is only around 5 million. So
but when I think it's the wording.
Yeah.
Yes, the wording is isn't that misleading to say we obviously we'll be using reserves as many authorities do, and we made those decisions together. Yeah. But just to describe it as a deficit budget, I think
not an overspent budget, but it's only balanced by using reserves.
Yeah, you have to set a balanced budget. Whether you take £1 million out of your reserves or 10 million out of reserves, you still have to make it balanced. But at the end of the year, you still spend 10 million more than you probably should have. You can't do that every year. Councillor Barnes.
Yes, at Audit Committee the other day, we looked at the risk register, and the risk register on the financial situation is scored at 20, which means almost certain to happen. And what is almost certain to happen, if we don't get savings right this year, is financial oblivion. We can't afford another year like this. We've been going on since 2019, 2020. Finding somewhere between 2 and 3 million a year out of reserves and other capital receipts in order to keep going. And that is no longer going to be possible. You will be down below your level of 5 million, which is the essential minimum at the end of this year if we don't actually deliver the savings programme. I think the biggest disappointment, and there are reasons for it, I accept, is that we were £1 million adrift on the financial stability programme. High interest rates and our skill in using them, and I think we need to pay tribute to those in the finance department who actually made the best possible use, I think, of those high interest rates to generate income. I think some of our provision on regeneration funds has also generated increased income. So some of the things have gone right, but at the end of the day, we've actually ended, because the capital programme is coming on stream, slightly worse off than we actually forecast at the beginning of the year. So the next item becomes absolutely crucial because we can only take note of what is, because that is factual, and this is what is likely to be the year-end statement. But at the end of the day, that lends new urgency to the next item on our agenda.
Okay, so, Councillor Burton.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a short, small item on page 41. It's a question, actually, and I think it is relevant for us to know the answer. Under neighbourhood services, they mention income from garden and bulky waste collections, which I understand what they are, textile recycling a significant amount, and resurfacing works. And I don't know what those two items are, and I think it would be useful for us to know, particularly when feeding back to our wards where they can help. And I don't know what they are, but others may. Or we could hear later, maybe.
Anna, you know that one.
I know what some of them are. So the resurfacing works are beach regrading. So we saved some money because we took the regrading of the beach in-house. We used Lee Beckham's maintenance team to do it rather than using our contractor. So we saved money that way. And I think the textiles, I could be wrong, but I think it's like the clothes bank. And one of them we got money back from, but I'll check that one.
Because I'm not sure where the collection point and how we can facilitate that more. That's my question.
Yeah, I think I'll find out about that for you.
Thank you. Councillor Byrne?
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check that we are still on target to for our end-of-year statement to show that we are still looking at not dipping below our 5 million? So despite Councillor Barnes's prophecies of doom because it's on the risk register, we still are on target, and we are forecasting that we won't go below
March 24. Yes,
right, and we're forecasting we will not dip below the 5 million,
but we will if we carry on as we are.
Oh, absolutely, yes. No, I understand that completely. But so far, if we carry on with our strategy, we're not going to sink. We've got to keep failing.
Be clear, Chairman, I am not forecasting disaster. I'm merely pointing out that unless we deliver £2 million of savings, we shall dip below the 5 million.
So basically, we've got to make sure we've got a big enough rudder to avoid the iceberg. Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. The trouble is we don't know what's down the road, further down the road. I mean, the interest rates at the moment are quite high, but from many people's perception, if the banks are right, they might drop later on in the summer or later, which means you won't accrue that extra money you think you're going to get. The second thing is it's a very, very serious situation. We've got statutory, non-statutory obligations as a council, and one thing that always worries me is we can shift staff around and try and use them in the best way possible. And we've had a report on that. But we're operating with about 25% less staff than we were 5 or 6 years ago. And there's a limit to how much pressure you can put on the staff. And they do a fantastic job for us. And I wouldn't be happy if one of the ways of making saving was further reductions in staff numbers, because it's not only about the morale, it's about the fact that they're probably being pushed pretty hard as it is now.
Andrew, did you want to come back on anything?
Just to say, ironically, on interest rates, actually, in the longer term, it would be useful if they did fall, because we're making lots of money at the minute because we've got all the sort of levelling up money in the bank account. As we spend that over the next couple of years, we won't have that huge sum in interest, but what we will have is the capital programme coming on stream, and we will start borrowing. So actually, we want interest rates to fall in a year or so's time when we go from being a lender to a borrower. And the timing will be quite sweet, really.
Right. Lorna.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say a few words about our people strategy, and the point that Councillor Clark made there is a really important one. We absolutely need to be focused on the things that we absolutely have to do, and we need to be developing staff into roles that we're struggling to recruit to. But you know, we do need to challenge some of the discretionary services that we're providing at the moment. So it's not that we're going to be asking staff to do work even harder to make those savings. It's that we're going to be fundamentally looking what we're doing. And that might mean that we need to redeploy staff into areas that aren't easy to recruit to. But I don't want you to think that we're just asking staff to do more and more and more without that certainly isn't the case. It's very much about focusing our resources on where they're needed. And we have had to make some tough choices lately. So things like print room, that was a discretionary area of spend. Now it might take a little bit of time for the saving to be realised, and that might be not quite where we'd hoped it will be, but ultimately that will save us about £114,000. So, you know, these choices are having to be made, but at the same time, we are investing in staff and we're making sure we're focused on the things that we need to do. So it isn't just kind of a random kind of, you know, we're asking staff to do more. So I really just wanted to make that point, and just to say that I think it's really important that we keep our foot on the gas. It's not easy to make these savings, and you know we're going to have to keep going at it. I think the report that's coming up next shows that actually we've made headway, but the problem with some of these savings is actually realising the saving takes some time. So we're sort of continuing with that strategy of savings, but at the same time some of our costs are increasing, and some of the income that was predicted to be made hasn't yet been made. So we need to just make sure we're always aware of the picture, and I think the work that Andrew's done on the next item is going to be really useful going forward, and making sure that this committee keeps an eye on all of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, so we've got here purpose of the report to note the offer and recommendation resolved the following. Someone happy to move that, and they're going to cabinet next week. Yep. Councillor Barnes, seconder. Councillor Byrne, all those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much. Next item, item 8. Savings Assurance Report. This is the new one that Andrew wants to keep everybody on their toes. So what have we got? Purpose of the report: to assure members that officers have taken the necessary actions to ensure that savings will be delivered in line with the proposals set out in the 24-25 budget. Officer recommendation resolved that the report is noted. So this is your report, Andrew. Over to you.
Okay, so this is the first in a series of reports that will come to you during the year. This report focuses more on actions officers have taken in preparation to deliver the savings. Future reports will start reporting on actual delivery of the savings. But this is more of an assurance report to say people are doing what they need to have done in order to start delivering those savings. So if they had to put up fees and charges to get extra income, that has been done. Car parks, if they need to sort of be getting the car park machines changed, that is in progress. Interest is coming in as expected, etc. So what we've done, we've sat down, Lorna and myself, Joe in my department have sat down with every service manager who has a saving in the budget, looked them in the eyes and said, are you doing what is necessary to actually deliver that saving? We've then rag rated what they've told us. You can see the results in the table. There is still going to be a lot of monitoring needed during the year to make sure that those savings are actually delivered. But what I can assure members at this stage is that officers have taken the actions they needed to take in time to deliver the savings. Because the worst possible thing you get is if you have a budget and then people only start thinking about it halfway through the year and then they don't deliver that full year's savings. So people have taken the actions in time to deliver the savings that are in the budget. Time will tell whether all those savings will happen for various reasons. We will monitor them. The other point I would make is this is only half the story. So this is the savings in the budget. So progress is good on this. As you can see, there's a lot of green. But there is a budget monitoring report going to Cabinet next week, which is showing an overspend, quite a significant overspend in other areas. And so this is only part of the picture of monitoring the budget, and we'll bring those two together later in the year to sort of put them all into the one report. But at the minute, people have done the actions to deliver the savings, but that is only the necessary first step. There's a lot of hard work still to do.
Thank you. So basically, a start.
Yep.
anything, or should we just say we're resolved to note that? Oh, Councillor Barnes. Councillor Cook first.
Thank you. I just want to say thank you, Andrew, for one of the first times I've actually understood this.
Councillor Barnes.
Yes, I think it's what Councillor Clark said and what Lorna said. I think quite an important aspect is improving our productivity by the use of technology, AI, IT in general, which I think is quite an important way of economising on staff without actually putting more burden on the people who are actually doing the work. We can ease their task if we get our IT, our AI state of the art. And I'm not sure where that's being monitored, but it's going to be a very important component of the overall package.
Just to say the digital strategy will be coming for members in the next couple of months, and there is quite an element of AI in that as well, and I think we're ahead of the game in some aspects of AI, and you'll see that over the next few months.
Yeah, exactly what I was saying. We've got a digital task and finish group working beavering away, and it's coming to us soon. So, Councillor Legg.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Andrew, for that report and this table that I understand every single part of it. Except, is it possible to clarify what lane boys are, in which we're saving £5,000?
Which
Oh, it is that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Isn't the Environment Agency responsible for that? Lane boys.
I don't think so.
They run the harbour. It's one of the only harbours they're responsible for, isn't it? We could ask it Horak.
Horak next week, isn't it? Next week.
I'll have a question to ask at Horak.
I know my departed father-in-law used to have to go out and service a lane boy when he worked at Allsorts, but I'm going back 40 odd years, so who knows what happens to it now. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you. Just to comment on the digital provision and use of technology, not only are we gaining the productivity, but as Andrew said, it's very important that we monitor. And there's a big element, we can monitor so much better what we're doing and the effectiveness and the cost effectiveness of what we're doing with the advances we've made in the use of technology. So it's not just the profit we get from letting AI do things that humans used to do. We can better monitor what we're doing and how effective it is and focus our staff in the right areas. So I just want to redress this idea that maybe AI is replacing staff. It's not. It's letting us refocus the staff to doing things that humans do best and letting computers do what they do best. The other thing is with lane boys, I believe that lane boys are ours and the rec boys and hazard boys are the Admiralty or whoever, the Naval Authority. Just a thought.
Councillor Cook.
Yes, just a very petty thing under neighbourhood services on page 61. You've got green bin fee increase. I think that should read brown bin. I'd hate the residents to get up in arms and think they've got to start paying for their green bins to be emptied.
No, nationally as green bins.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But yeah.
Right, so we're pretty happy with this one. Someone want to move it? Councillor Cook? Yeah. Seconded. Councillor Byrne? All those in favour? That's carried. Thank you very much, Andrew. Right, last one, work programme. So 8th of the 7th is done. 9th of the 9th, performance report first quarter, revenue budget first quarter, savings assurance report, corporate plan consultation, report on the digital customer services. Was that one delayed, Louise? That was.
Was originally going to come here.
Yeah. annual report of the Delaware Pavilion, which could be quite long. I think that was about right, wasn't it? Yeah. Are you in agreement with that, Lorna? It was about right on that one? Nodding, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I think we've got enough to do next meeting, haven't we?
So moved, Chairman.
Councillor McGurk.
Yeah, the item for consideration, impact of Airbnb and second homes in Canberra and Winchelsea. We've discussed that. I think it's been discussed before, isn't it? And it's sort of, I know we had to rationalise the agenda because there's a bit of pressure, but I would like to see that scheduled if we could. November is looking a bit light. Would it be possible to timetable that for November? Because I would, I think we would certainly. I would like to see that for a bit of a scrutiny on that, and I would like to also to have some input into that report as well and some liaison.
Well, would you want us, if we can, we could set up it probably might be best to have a quick task and finish group on it, wouldn't it?
That would be great, but I would really welcome that actually, because I don't think it's straightforward. I think it's easy to make assumptions about, the impact, but actually the benefits to local economy, this kind of thing, also could, I would really welcome.
How many task and finish groups we got running at the moment, Louise?
We've currently got 3, but the digital customer service one will be coming to an end. So really, there's just the 2 that are currently in place.
All right. What if I'll tell you what. It won't take us 2 minutes, will it? What? Can we put it on the agenda for the next meeting? To set up to sort of get a task and finish group, and then I can get the names. Lorna, does that work?
It does, Chair. I just think perhaps we should make sure we're closing some of the task and finish groups down before we start another. But if we can get names at this stage, I think that would be helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. That's all I was thinking. I thought if we got names, then we've got to start, and then when one finishes, we can put it into the next one and not waste a couple of months. Yeah.
Can I just ask as well, while we're on that, task and finish groups, is in terms of governance, is that only open to members and officers, or can we invite other people like members of the Chamber of Commerce onto it? Yes, great, okay, thanks.
Yeah, you can invite expert witnesses in. I'm not sure. I don't think they can become members, can they? Can they become members of? I can't remember if we did or not once. We not? No, but we can get them in, can't we? No. Yeah. We can get people in and ask and yeah. But I think we'll do that next meeting. We get it on the agenda. Then I can send an email out, get some names. Then we've got to start, haven't we? All right. Right. Well, I think that's it. So I'm going to say the meeting is closed at 29 minutes past 8. Thank you very much for your time this evening. Safe journey home, and we'll go from there.